Welcome back. This week we're talking about episode 11 of Siberia, the season finale. Before I launch into what is sure to be a long episode, I wanted to apologize again for getting this review out so late. You see, I recently picked up a second job, and it just so happened that this week had me working 13-hour days between the two employers. I won't come right out and say where I'm working part-time, but I will describe it as a place where you can stop to purchase recreational electronic equipment. I've been reassured by my part-time boss that weeks like this won't be the norm. That means even though I don't have as much free time, I should still have enough time to continue doing reviews. But now that Siberia is done for the season, whatever will I cover? Well, after many suggestions and much consideration, the next subject for my scrutiny is none other than The Blacklist, starring James Spader, airing Monday nights at 10 p.m. on NBC. Now, NBC has uploaded a long trailer on YouTube, and I'll put a link for that video in the description, and you can check that out. And it's pretty exciting from what I've seen. One last thing before I start. I have finished the timeline of events according to the rising and setting of the sun on the show, and have found that the entirety of Season 1 took place in just 14 days. That's right, 2 weeks. Chew on that for a bit, because without further interruption, let's start the review. Quick episode recap. Irene stepped on a landmine. Reinforcements arrived.
We called you! No, we called you!
Joyce almost got a bullet to the head.
What?
Oh my God!
The Valleyman stirred up some trouble. Johnny stole a getaway vehicle.
Let's go!
Annie was killed during the escape. Esther left everyone in the dust.
Hey! Push the brakes!
The contestants made it to town.
There's nobody here, it's evacuated!
What does it say?
Nico found a place to stay.
Don Gutierrez, anyone here?
And Jonathan had no idea what was going on.
You're not supposed to be here.
Fun fact, did you know that it's only been 6 episodes since the entire remaining cast has been in one place? It's funny to think of that because looking at the events timeline that I've been maintaining for the show, you see that it was only 4.5 days between when Daniel and the others left camp and Sabina and the others found the research lab. I could say time flies when you're having fun, but in this instance the opposite seems to hold true. Speaking of holding, let's break down this season finale. Once again, we picked up where we left off last week with the Fellowship in the research lab, just hanging out waiting to be rescued. Joyce came in and asked what was taking so long, which prompted Daniel to go outside to check the cables, since apparently the radio signal had gone out. It wasn't too clear to me at first that there was an issue, but who knows, it was probably just Minox chewing on the cables. For whatever reason the cables were broken, it got Daniel and Johnny outside to see the others coming from a distance. But as nothing good can happen in this show, the welcome sight of the Contestants Reunited was sullied by the revelation that Irene had stepped on a landmine.
Tell me what happened.
I was just walking and
There are
then
landmines out here.
I felt something go down and I heard a sound, I heard a click.
Now, I'm not one of those savants at Minesweeper. I've never been able to finish a single game. So I feel like I can sympathize with Irene, with the only exception being that she was standing on an actual landmine and I was terrible at a computer game. I've wondered why this scene was included, because when I was watching Monday night, I thought it was just another throwaway thing to draw out the suspense. But looking back at the episode as a whole, in the context of Daniel and Irene's relationship, the ordeal was actually quite significant. Before their moment in the minefield, Daniel had done things for Irene, like when he used his shirt to tie off her leg and left camp to find help for her. But Irene had never really done anything for Daniel. In this scene, however, Irene made a decision to trust Daniel, and by doing so, showed him that he meant enough to her for her to bet her life on it. I realize now that I just used the word her 3 times in a row. I want to apologize to all the English majors out there. Don't worry, you'll find a job someday. Anyway, This was Irene's moment to stop being acted upon and begin to act herself, which continued later in the episode when she and Daniel shared that kiss on the balcony. Another thing that scene did was establish that there were mines scattered around the research lab, which would come into play later in the episode. The distribution of landmines around the lab raises a bit of a red flag when it comes to how much the dead researchers knew about the Valley Men. I mean, surely the people in the lab knew about the Valley Men and what they were capable of. Why else would they surround their compound with high explosives if not to keep the flesh-hungry mutants at bay? Once everyone was safe and sound in the lab, the contestants caught up on what happened while they were separated. Johnny told the story of when he died on the tower, and Sam told everyone about a moment where he almost gave up. You sometimes hear stories of people who die, but for one reason or another are told by someone that it's not their time and they need to go back. In this instance, it was Natalie who appeared to Sam in this dream of his, and she's the one who tells him to go back. The weird thing about this is that Sam didn't know Natalie was dead. Annie broke down at the mention of Natalie and excused herself, and it's then that we got that quiet scene with Annie and Sam next to that sink in the other room. I have to admit that I really liked this scene. What brought it home for me was the simple way that Sam spoke about losing his wife and then reassured Annie. He communicated to her that he was no stranger to grief, and that while the pain is always there, so is that person's memory. Just because they're gone doesn't mean that they're forgotten. And looking back at this scene is extra sad when you consider what happens later in the episode.
Sam?
Yeah.
Thanks.
As Johnny and Daniel went back to work on the cables lining the roof, a truck rumbled into the research lab. Like before, nothing good can happen on this show, and the contestants were all lined up by men with guns. Sam overheard two of the gunmen talking to one another and told Million that they are here looking for a weapon of some kind, and more importantly that they are the ones who killed the scientists inside the Institute. Unfortunately, that's all we really get as far as information about this squad of masked gunmen. I've kicked a couple of theories around in my head, but I can't seem to come up with one that really fits the situation. There's just not enough information right now. If you have any good ideas as to who these people are and what they want, be sure to include your theories in the comments section below. Joyce attempted a diplomatic resolution to the situation, but that only resulted in a gun to her head. As frightening as monsters in the woods can be, I think this sequence was the scariest so far. These gunmen aren't fairy tale monsters making scary noises in the shadows. They are flesh and blood killers with guns and bullets. There's no two ways about it. These men have the power to take life, and there is no assurance that they won't use that power. I've said before that sometimes the greatest fear is the fright unseen, but watching Joyce strapped to the front of that truck with a gun to her head was probably the most scared I've been all season. We're spared a gory execution thanks to the sudden and unexpected arrival of the Valley Men. The Valley Men attack can best be described as frantic and disorienting. But in saying that, I want to make sure that you know I mean that in the best possible way. The advantage of doing Siberia from the point of view of the cameramen following the contestants is that we're able to get right down in the trenches with the characters and experience everything they do at ground level. That being said, I would have preferred to see a bit more of the gunmen fighting. As it stood, the violence was happening out of sight and the focus was on the characters, as it should be, but it was hard to determine if the battle was going in favor of the gunmen or the Valley Men. I would have liked to get a few more glimpses of the battle is all. I will admit that the ambiguity of the fighting served to make the discovery of the door open more suspenseful. At first we don't know who or what had come through the door, and that is good drama right there. Of course we see rather quickly that it's one of the gunmen, but he's dispatched quick enough and the contestants make their escape. Before I talk about the escape, I want to go back and point out that while everyone was huddled away from the fighting, it was Nico who asked Johnny what the next move was.
Johnny, what's the next move?
This is super important, you guys. Nico actually put aside his ego and deferred to another person, and not just anyone, but Johnny of all people. I've been ragging on Nico pretty hard lately, but I think he's finally gotten to a point where he's not the hothead that he's been all this time. I think it's clear that Nico's learned how not to act from his time around Sabina. While I'm at it, I wanted to share something I noticed about the struggle with the gunmen while reviewing the episode. While I was watching it on Monday night, I thought the flashes were from blanks that they had loaded into the gun, but if you freeze frame each flash, you can see that they're making the muzzle flash using a strobe light. You can tell it's a strobe light because of the shadow on the wall. If the flash were coming from the muzzle of the gun, then the shadow would be below them on the floor and out of sight. But where the shadow is on the wall behind them, you can tell that the person operating the strobe was somewhere off to the cameraman's left. Throw in some sound effects to make it sound like the gun is being fired, and bingo! Darkroom gunfire. This has been TV Magic 101, now let's get back on track. Johnny and Sabina made their way outside and took advantage of the distracted gunmen by taking the truck and loading everyone in the back. Well, they don't get everyone.
Ellie! Ellie! Stop!
Stop this and we forget!
As the contestants began piling in the back, the gunmen started shooting at them, and Annie was killed before she could even get close. This actually took me by surprise. In the commotion of making a getaway, I thought Annie was one of the people in the back of the truck, and seeing her gunned down the way she was came totally out of left field. Annie was not the person I expected to die this episode, and I'm not sure that I'm happy to see her go. My gut wants me to say that Annie was the emotional center of the group, and without her around, I feel like the series will be missing a certain something that I'm having trouble articulating into words. The discovery of Annie's sketchbook didn't make her departure any easier to take, but in the absence of a goodbye, I like how the episode took a moment to reflect on what Annie meant to the group. It was a somber note to end that particular day. On a completely unrelated note, is Joyce wearing a wedding ring in this shot? Apparently there's a story behind it. After a full night of driving, Johnny hit a patch of black ice or something and the truck went off the road. Everything seemed hunky-dory as the contestants tried to push the truck out of the ditch, but as soon as Esther volunteered to climb into the cab and gave the camera one of her looks, it was clear that she was up to something. Yep, that's the look. Right there. Instant trouble. As she drove away, I was rather surprised, although probably not as surprised as the other contestants. It's here that Miljan confirmed that Esther had taken the money from the revealer.
Guess where money was? Money was in the revealer. That was the very last thing in the revealer that was supposed to come out.
I really don't know why I was so surprised to see Esther pull something like this. I mean, she's been an antagonist literally the entire season. There was no reason for her not to do something like this. But even so, I didn't see it coming. At this point, we've all seen the cliffhanger, and I think most of us want a second season, so I fully expect Esther to factor heavily into Season 2. I don't think she will be a POV character since she didn't bring a cameraman with her, but I think the other characters will insist on hunting her across the Siberian wilderness in a bid to get the money that she took. In fact, you could almost revolve an entire season around that one concept. The 8 remaining contestants resolved to chase Esther in a bid to recover the money and split it among themselves, all the while still having to contend with the threat of the Valley Men. Along the way, some questions are answered, some questions arise, maybe some romance blossoms.
Some friends become enemies, some enemies become friends, yeah? At the end, your main character is richer for the experience, yeah?
Nah, I'm sure it'll be good. The contestants got to the town on the map and found it completely deserted, abandoned after a military evacuation order. There was no power and no phones, but Sam did find the truck that Esther stole, although it was abandoned in an alleyway. It's interesting to me that Esther would take the truck only to leave it behind once she got to the town. I'm guessing that she found something a little smaller and more economical in the town and drove away in that. Even without power in the town, she could still siphon some gas from the other vehicles and get away long before the others showed up. So at this point, she could be anywhere, really. The possibility exists that she was taken by someone or something when she reached the town, but I'm hoping that she's still on the run so we can have that chase plot I mentioned for Season 2. Nico noticed a light on in one of the apartment buildings and the contestants decided to check it out. The place was empty, so they decided to make themselves at home. Johnny got cooking in the kitchen, Miljan found something useful in the hallway closet, and Daniel and Irene shared that kiss I mentioned earlier. As night fell, Sabina was taking inventory of the supplies she brought along, and Joyce noticed the tape that she found in the woods. The tape that contained footage of what happened when Johnny and Joyce got amnesia in episode 4.
They told me that the camera that was filming me and Johnny got lost in the woods. Do you know what's on it?
No.
The footage began with Johnny yelling at Joyce and punching a tree out of frustration. I want to point out that this is not the first time Johnny has punched a tree, and I hope he knows that while punching trees in Minecraft will give you wood to build with, the same cannot be said for real life. Anyway, they found one of the dome structures that the Evenki consider cursed, and ignorant of the possible danger, walked right inside. I'm not sure what the symbols on the outside of the dome are meant to represent, but I did notice that they're made of the same line and triangle structure of the Valleymen sign.
Look.
Hieroglyphics? What?
Johnny called them hieroglyphs, but it would be more accurate to call them runes, as hieroglyphs are typically pictures as opposed to symbols that form an alphabet. Feel free to correct me on that if the mood strikes you. You'll probably notice by looking at this still shot that the last symbol in the line is one for the Valleymen. So it's written out plain as day that the domes have something to do with the Valleymen. What's not so clear is what the 16 dots on the inside of the dome are supposed to be. The show would have you believe that the shape surrounding the dots is the Valley of Death and the 16 dots are the 16 contestants and that it was all put there by aliens, but I'm a little more skeptical. I don't have a theory to replace it, but I'd be a little disappointed if it was that simple. The footage cut from the dome to Johnny and Joyce in the woods at night hiding from something that they couldn't see. Suddenly the camera turns and we get our first look at the Valleymen. The shot is quick and mostly shrouded in darkness, but you can make out the general shape of the monster. Now, if you're like me and you like messing with footage, you can crank up the RGB gamma settings and get a pretty clear view of this creature. As you can see from the Brighton footage, the Valleymen are fairly tall bipeds with a broad upper torso that narrows to the waist. Their limbs are narrow, yet muscular, which end in hands that have 2 long fingers and a thumb. Unfortunately, we don't have a good view of the feet, so I have nothing to compare to the Evenki snowshoes. The head seems to be somewhat triangular from the front, with a mouth that kind of hangs down in the front. They also look like they have some protrusions on their back where the shoulder is. I don't know how Johnny, Joyce, and the cameraman got away, but Joyce did get cut up a bit. One theory as to how Joyce, Johnny, and the cameraman survived the attack was that the Valleymen were just trying to herd them away so that they could launch the beam, which is kind of frightening because it would suggest that the Valleymen aren't just animals, but they are intelligent in some way to launch this massive light. It seems that the light shot is the thing that caused Johnny and Joyce to forget where they were, because as soon as the beam had lit up the sky, the two of them lost all sense of where they were.
Are you okay?
Don't touch me. Don't touch me. What happened?
At that point, the cameraman dropped the camera for Sabina to find later, and the footage ended. Before the contestants could watch the tape again, Sabina heard voices outside, and a look out the window showed that the gunman had followed them. The contestants took positions behind a few walls, but the person who walked in wasn't a gun-toting mercenary.
Buckley?
You're not supposed to be here.
And that's how Season 1 of Siberia ended. Jonathan's reveal adds a few new questions as to what exactly is going on here. For all we knew, he was dead in a helicopter crash, but there he was, alive, well, and apparently living in that apartment. The first question that comes to my mind is, what happened to the gunmen? Last we saw, they were making their way inside, but they don't show up. Furthermore, what is Jonathan's connection to the gunmen? Who knows at this point? We'll just have to wait until Season 2. And now it's time for the Tweet of the Week. This week's tweet comes from my main man at S01E11. It says, "The next time I see you, it will be in Season 2. I know it in my heart, XOXO, at NBC Siberia, at Siberia Fans, at NBC, and a heart does not lie. Hashtag Siberia." Back in episode 8, I mentioned the Siberia Season 2 hashtag and said that I would be all for a second season as long as it fits into the story. Well, after the season finale that we got, I don't think they can get away without a second season. But here's the issue. Siberia has been taken to the cleaners by Under the Dome every single week this summer. While Under the Dome was pulling in over 10 million viewers, Siberia had just under 2 million. It's not an easy thing to hear, but the numbers don't lie. It will take something spectacular to get Siberia a second season on NBC. Now, that something could be massive support from the fans, or it could also be the determination of the production staff to continue the show. But whatever it is, it needs to happen. Now, that's not to say that cable television and the internet aren't viable options. Netflix revived Arrested Development for another season, and there are a whole slew of original shows popping up exclusively on Netflix. I consider myself somewhat of a realist, so while I'm hopeful for another season next summer, I'm also very aware that NBC might disavow Siberia altogether. Even so, I'm going to hold out hope that someone at NBC sees the promise of Siberia and brings it back for another run. After all, it's Monday night during the summer. What do they have to lose? As the final episode of Season 1, I think episode 11 was excellent. I appreciate how it brought everyone back together and gave us meaningful emotional moments while still reminding us of how high the stakes are. The action was visceral and claustrophobic at times, and really gave those scenes the weight and severity that we've come to expect. I also really liked how much all the characters have grown over the course of the show, even if it hasn't been that long according to their timeline. We got a lot of setup for a second season, so there's plenty of unanswered questions, but after watching it through to the end, I don't feel frustrated by a lack of information. Rather, I'm once again curious about what might happen next. It's my opinion that Siberia's strength lies in its ability to pique your interest and keep you wondering, all the while endearing you to its cast of characters. Here at the end of Season 1, I want to congratulate the cast and crew for a job well done and express my heartfelt gratitude for the enjoyment you've brought. Here's hoping that the dream of a second season comes true. As always, please comment below to keep the conversation going, subscribe to my channel for more of these weekly reviews of Monday Night Drama on NBC, and follow me on Twitter to see what I have to say during each episode. So until next week, I'm Rick D, and thanks for watching.